What's going on, everyone? Thanks for joining us today for the 1004 show. We're here with Jerry Ross of the National Entrepreneur Center in Orlando, Florida. What's going on, Jerry?
Hey, how you doing? We're having a wonderful hot day in Orlando.
Love it. Also hot here in southeastern Virginia. I want to start with a huge stat. You guys have helped last year alone, I think, over 200,000 businesses and face to face 15,000 business owners. I mean, that's insane.
It is. It's a very high volume center, and so it's 15,000 business people. And so those business folks could have come back for multiple visits. But what happens is we have combined 13 independent business support organizations into one location. And so when people come, maybe to visit one, they discover two or three other ones that they might be able to visit that could help them. And so sometimes that's for coaching, which is free. Sometimes that's for an educational seminar, like how do I do QuickBooks, or how do I get started, or should I be an entrepreneur? And sometimes it's just to attend a networking event.
Very cool. Orlando is one of those next cities that a lot of people are starting to flock to, start businesses with. How long have you guys been working on trying to make Orlando a place that's attractive to grow a business and then maybe even attract a business?
Well, it's been about a 15-year process here as part of the community because we're a worldwide destination for tourism. And so everyone hears Orlando and they think of all of our great theme parks. About 15 years ago, there became a community effort to say, Orlando, you don't know the half of it. There's another half of Orlando that we should be focusing on because some of that was to support NASA and the space shuttle program. And so there was a lot of tech businesses here, which attracted some of the modeling and simulation industry to serve the military. But that brought Madden football with EA Sports, which is modeling and simulation. Yeah. And so over the last 15 years, the community as a whole has said, how do we reach out and support not only those businesses that are here, but attract those innovative businesses that can serve that industry as well as the theme park industry, which is very creative.
I follow the theme park world a lot. My ultimate goal in life is to be a majority owner of an amusement park. I have to say majority because I already own some shares in some publicly traded parks, so I have to say the majority piece. But living here in the Virginia Beach, Norfolk area, we also have a lot of things that are based around ModSim, but I think Orlando has done a tremendously better job at making it more of an industry. And you'd have a lot of conversations up here where folks are saying, Orlando is crushing us. And so it's awesome to hear you guys talk about this. I've always thought that we focus on the military side of ModSim too much and not the other applications that could be out there. The Maddens, you guys host IAPA, which is the International Amusement Park convention every year.
You bet.
And all of this training that is so important with ModSim and all of this, what is my roller coaster going to look like before I actually build it type of thing. There's so many applications that can be there. And you guys have had the foresight to say, all right, let's really think about what can be here.
Exactly. And so the theme park application is perfect to say before you invest in building a roller coaster, is it going to make people sick? How do we do that? But also now with security and the threats of terrorism, to be able to say, let's simulate what it might look like to do a response to a disaster. With our hurricane season, we can simulate what would that look like and what could we do. And so, and that even applies to traffic as well. But our community, and what has made it different, from my opinion, is that at the top levels of the leadership of our community, there was a conscious decision made to collaborate, to work together. And so the Orlando mayor is a Democrat. The Orange County mayor, which surrounds Orlando, is a Republican. And they put on their small business hat and say, it doesn't matter whether we're Republicans or Democrats or left or right, we're going to work together for the good of the community. And that sounds simple and that sounds like common sense, but what that does is it really was a springboard for us as a community to say, how do we work together and we are stronger together? And so we have visitors from a lot of folks or a lot of areas around the country that come here to say, how do we do this business model that you're doing at the National Entrepreneur Center? And I say it all starts with what you learned in kindergarten, working together
Play
and
nice.
play nice in the sandbox and put your things away when you're done. And so that collaboration model has truly been what's made us different than other communities.
I think a lot of people talk about collaboration. A lot of
Mhm.
people say that they do it well. I think if you peel back, the onion, the banana peel, whatever, it's not the case, and collaboration doesn't really happen. So how? It's great that the leaders, the political leaders on both sides of the aisle got together. But how do you really start collaborating and understand if something is a true collaboration? What are kind of the steps that are necessary to be in there to have true collaboration and not just quote unquote collaboration?
Well, that's an excellent point that you're making because there's a difference between cooperation and collaboration.
Mm.
And so it wasn't always like that here. And so sometimes different organizations who are doing great work say, if I work together with someone else, maybe there will be something less of in the end for me. And what we do is to say, we want to build a bigger pie. But a perfect example is when I first started here 10 years ago, there was 8 organizations under this roof and 8 coffee pots in the break room. And so in my first week, I conducted my first ever funeral, and we buried the 7 coffee pots. We celebrated their service to the organizations and mourned their loss and put them away and said, if we can't share a coffee pot, this idea won't work. And so it's as basic as learning to share a coffee pot. When I went to Austin, and I stole this from Austin, I forget who the person was that said this, but I wrote it down and I ran up to him after the event and said, can I take this? And so he gave me the right to steal it from him. But he had a saying in Austin that said, unity of purpose with a continuity of effort. And so I came back to those 13 organizations that sit around our management board table and said, what can we all agree on? What can we say we can all commit to this? And that became meeting people coming through the front door, meeting them where they are and moving them forward, whether they run a $40 million company or they haven't started yet. And so all of the 13 organizations agreed, we will meet who walks through the front door and move them forward. But then we had to decide we're going to do this long enough to be successful. And so you can't do it for 3 days and say, well, it didn't work. And so our community invested in our center and gave us time to be successful. And they gave me the freedom to fail. Because as an entrepreneur, there's no book on how to do this. And so they allowed us to try ideas and say, be entrepreneurial. And I would go back to them and say, note to self, we're not going to do that again. It didn't work. But we were allowed to do the trial and error that's required, especially with changing economies and changing communities, to say what might work. And what might work today may not work tomorrow. And so we had that collaboration of we're all in a unity of purpose to help our small businesses grow. And we're going to do it long enough, regardless of who's elected or who's changes jobs. And so now when you see Orlando named as the #1 city in America for this or that, or small business growth and job growth, that's not an accident. That was a purposeful path that we set 15 years ago when we opened the National Entrepreneur Center.
Very cool. And there is a book being written on it. We're writing it right now, and so you'll be able to check that out soon. So a little
Great.
plug for that. No, I think you said something that's so key. And at the end of the day, it's really not about any one of these organizations. It's about the businesses that you are trying to help.
Exactly.
And egos aside and leaders aside, like at the end of the day, it's like taking that business, and if you can give them 1 ounce of help to get them to that next step, that's what matters. It doesn't matter if they went through, one of the 7 pots of coffee company that's there. It's about helping those businesses. And I love that funeral piece. Is that a true story?
Yes.
I mean, I love that. I think that's so true, and it's amazing. How did you said folks gave you kind of expectations to fail or try things out. What were how do they understand that like these we don't know what's going to work, where I think a lot of communities and businesses and business people say have a plan, follow that plan. As an entrepreneur, as me as an entrepreneur, we understand that those plans are difficult to follow as it is. How did you convince people that might not be business people to understand that the expectations are we're going to have to try a lot of things. We're going to have to take a bowl of spaghetti and throw it against the wall and see what sticks, and then see if that thing actually really did stick. So how did you kind of understand, or how did you explain to them that this is something that we don't know what's going to work and what's not?
Uh, I think sometimes, specifically in our situation, I was fortunate in that sometimes it takes a crisis for people to say, well, we've got to try something, or what we're doing now isn't working. And so in our community after 9/11, we were a tourist destination, and people were not flying. And so the businesses in Orlando were struggling in 2003. And so there was a crisis that happened where it really did bring people together to say, how do we help the small businesses who are struggling? And so I think it was that crisis that brought about the willingness to try something new. And then when I came aboard, it was saying, how do we make this sustainable? Now that we've got this open, how do we make it something that's viable and sustainable and impactful? And so for a long time, it was what we've done hasn't worked, and there's a new economy. And so as the economy continues, when we went through that in 2003, it was a struggle. And so the community was in crisis to say we got to do something. When we went through 2007 and 8, the Entrepreneur Center was here. And so there was a place to go when people would say, I'm struggling and I need help. And sometimes we were helping them manage the exit. So that if they could exit the business and save their shirt, that's part of the entrepreneurial churn too. And so I think what happened for us specifically was that there was enough of a crisis that people were willing to say, we've got to work together and we've got to try something new.
How do you sustain it?
Results. We measure results. We don't look at activity, we look at accomplishment. And so, for example, for a long period, economic development takes a long time. Mm-hmm. And so, typically communities aren't very patient with that. And so I would go and tell wonderful stories about the heartwarming businesses that we would help. But we knew that we needed data. And so we have been tracking data from day one. But also we hired a firm out of Austin, Texas, who specialized in measuring economic impact. And our difficulty was our 13 organizations here count jobs. This is how many jobs we've created, and this is what the salaries of those jobs are. And so that's the typical economic impact measurement. Where we were different is that we didn't want to count those because that would be double counting. Those organizations that live here are going to count that. What is our economic impact? And so we hired a firm that said, we need to either prove or disprove what we think. Are we really helping the way we think or not? And Angelou Economics, it was the firm, and they came in and measured 2 years ago a 14-to-1 economic impact to the community. And so for every dollar invested in this center, they were able to prove $14 of economic impact to the community. That made my job as the fundraiser much easier because it wasn't so much trust me, it was to say, trust me, and here's the stories that are real that you can reach out and touch of success, but here's the data that backs that up. That makes it sustainable.
$1 to $14 of community impact. I mean, that's pretty big. There's some studies that say whale hunting, the moving of one business from one locality to another, only brings on 10 cents to every dollar. So for you guys to be getting $14 off of a buck, that's some incredible stuff.
Right.
So what are there certain data points that they are tracking? So I know
sure.
You said that jobs aren't there, but what are some of the points that they're looking for?
Well, first of all, it's the money that we invest in the community. And so we raise money, and some of that comes from corporate sponsors, and some of that comes now from the state that's invested in our community. And so there is a financial impact of just when you're measuring economic impact, it's direct, indirect, and induced. And so by us moving to the mall and paying rent, that's a direct impact to the mall. When they have to hire someone extra to take care of our space, that's an indirect impact. But then when the person that they hire can buy tickets to go to see Orlando Magic or go to Disney, that's induced. And so that's part of that formula. But then also they went to the efficiencies that we've created by having 13 organizations that now don't have to have their own conference room and their own training room and the state-of-the-art technology that we have here to broadcast to the world. And so when you look at the efficiencies of that, that's a cost savings that is impact to the community, because all of them were able then to add staff to help more people.
Tell me about the mall story. I think it's very fascinating.
Well, when I first took over as an entrepreneur, I looked at our expenses and said, we're paying way too much in rent to be in downtown space overlooking Lake Eola. And so at the time, malls were moving from big box retail to mixed use. And we're a great mixed use tenant because we bring a lot of activity to the mall. And so they said, we would really like to have you move to the mall. And so when I went to my board and said, hey, I'm talking to these folks about maybe moving to the mall, it was like, clear. We had to shock them back into the reality to say, we got to think outside the box here. But what happened was the mall said, we are willing to help you build out your space because we're going to benefit from the people coming to the mall. And so they provided the money to build out 22,000 square feet with state-of-the-art technology, free parking, and 5,000 square feet more that we had. My overhead went down $60,000 a year. And so we lowered everyone's rent because we're a nonprofit. I don't have retained earnings. And so everyone's rent went down. We went from 50 walk-ins a month to 200. And now we're in a place where everyone's comfortable coming, because some of our clients, if they were landscaping contractors or painting contractors or construction folks, weren't comfortable coming downtown, finding parking, going into a Class A office space with a waterfall in the lobby. And we saved the community a bunch of money. And so that's the win-win collaboration of our community. And so when we did that project, we said, hey, we're a small business advocate. How many small businesses are you going to use on the project? And so the project, if one client had filled out their paperwork, we would have had 50% minority and women-owned businesses and small businesses working on the project. But that's the kind of advocacy that we not only help with in small business, but we promote actively in how we operate.
Very cool. So they give you about $2 million to renovate and be in there. You guys have 22,000 square feet. Is that what you said?
That's correct.
And so all the 13 organizations are under there. What are a couple examples of what are those organizations?
First of all, there's like the small business development centers that operate nationwide, SCORE chapters which operate nationwide. But then we have like the National Association of Women Business Owners. We have the UCF Incubator Program, which has an office here. But then we have several chambers like the Hispanic Chamber, the Asian American Chamber, the African American Chamber, the Chamber for Persons with Disabilities. And then we also have a representative from the U.S. Department of Commerce, who's a federal government employee whose only job here is to help Central Florida companies export. And so they have an office here. And so it's a very diverse group. We have Axion, which is a national organization that does micro lending. And so when someone comes in, let's say they're looking for coaching from SCORE, we may be able to connect them, if they're an African American women-owned business, to the African American Chamber, to the National Association of Women Business Owners. Prospera is a group here that is specifically targeted to helping Hispanic entrepreneurs. And so they come in to see one, and we can connect them with four.
Very cool.
And they all pay rent here, but they pay for their footprint. They don't have to pay for all the common area.
You guys have 86,000 Facebook followers.
Yes,
that's a lot. How did you guys get to that amount?
Well, we tested. I mean, anything we do here, we try to do on research. So here's where we decided early on. We had about 5,000 Facebook followers. And we wanted to test for early adopters, brand loyalty, and social media strength to say, should we be investing in this?
Mhm.
And so I asked how many people we could get in our training room if we moved all the tables out. And it was 180. And so I put a posting out that said 180 seats, 180 minutes, 7 speakers, 1 location, 0 cost, register here with my logo. And we had 180 reservations in 6 days.
Wow.
I had 100 people on the waiting list in 10 days. And I hadn't told them who the speakers were.
Did you
And
know
so,
who the speakers were yet?
oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I wasn't that crazy.
Some people test that way.
And so we knew we hadn't spent any money on advertising, that social media had done something. 140 of the 180 showed up to a free event that they had registered online to. And so that showed us brand loyalty, that if they knew that if we did it, it would be good. And so the early adopters didn't need all the information. And so now we have 280 people in our database that are early adopters and very brand loyal that we can test ideas on. That's when we said we need to invest in social media. And so we have about half the followers of the US SBA, but our engagement is twice the US SBA because our content is relevant, it's tactical, it's practical. Some of it is motivational, but it has convened a conversation around entrepreneurship around the world. And so I visited Medellin, Colombia. They have about 13 entrepreneur centers in Medellin alone. Istanbul, Turkey. People sign on from all over the world because the basics of small business are the same everywhere in the world.
Yep.
The piece that changes is the cultural piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so while we can't get into all of those cultures, marketing is marketing and leadership is leadership. Accounting better be the same everywhere in the world. And so that's why we have generated a lot of international interest and international engagement.
Very cool. You are a former entrepreneur, business owner. I think that's so important in the role that you're in, because a lot of times folks that are in positions like yours, or maybe even running an incubator, are actually never business owners, have never felt that kind of pain, or continuing to get a paycheck. Why do you think it's so important that you have experience in what you're doing, so that when you're talking to folks that they can really understand that you've been in their shoes before?
I do think it's important. I think there's a lot of good research and there's a lot of good books, but until it's time to make a payroll, it's a unique feeling, and so I think it's much like doing the modeling and simulation. I've done those things where I felt like I was a surfer, but I haven't surfed. And so until you get out there in the waves and get on the board, do you realize this is a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be. And so being an entrepreneur is tough. It's hard, and it takes everything you got. And so it's the hardest job I've ever had, but it's the best job I've ever had. And so until you've gone through that, that stress, that uncertainty, that passion of I've got to do this. This has got to work, and also the vision piece to say I've been there and visited success. I know what it looks like. It's just even moving here to the center. I went to my board and said, I see it. I know what it could be. I can get us there. When we got there, several of my board members said, I never saw it. You built this 18-foot tall tree. You have this village that's made up of storefronts of your providers. I never got it till the day we walked through it. And I knew you had the vision. And so with an entrepreneur, we never say never. We never say no. What we say is you need to be prepared and you need to manage your risk box, because I didn't buy a pet rock and he made millions. I would have counseled Google to change their name, but it seems to be working for them. And so there are times that people see things that we don't, but there's also times to say you need to do your research and manage your risk box.
Very cool. We're talking with Jerry Ross of the National Entrepreneur Center in Orlando. If a business owner was trying to grow their business and they don't know how to really understand the resources that are potentially in front of them, whether the services that you guys could provide or one of the 13 organizations under you are also in that building, like, how does a business owner start to really understand what is available to them and how can they use it?
Well, I think it all depends on the entrepreneur. One of my mentors says, if you've met one entrepreneur, you've met one entrepreneur. And so I think everyone is different. And sometimes uh, people who know resources are out there, they don't know what that might mean to them until they need it. And so, one of the things we struggle with is we help thousands of entrepreneurs. And then there's my fear is the person who walks through the front door to say, I needed you 6 months ago. I didn't know you were there. And so what I think happens is that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And so when someone says, I want to start a business, that's when knowing the resources becomes important to them. And that's when they start asking around and finding them. Until that moment when they're downsized or laid off, or that they say, I'm not going to work at this company anymore, or they retire and say, I want to start a business, that's when it becomes important for them and they start looking for the resource. Sometimes when they run in our front door looking for resources, we can open their eyes to other resources. But it's like an attorney commercial. The attorney commercial comes on TV and I mute it. And then the day after you're sued, that becomes the most interesting commercial on TV. And so I think sometimes it's just waiting for the entrepreneur to be ready for the information.
I love that line. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. That's cool. What are some things that people need to know about the business community in Orlando?
First of all, it's much diverse and much more dynamic than you would ever imagine. Most people know Orlando is a great place to go. I've had people that said, I've been to downtown Orlando, and I say, no, you've been to downtown Disney. Downtown Orlando is a different place. It's 12 miles away. So first of all, there's a lot more things going on in Orlando than just theme parks. Secondly, is any community can embrace collaboration and vision. And we have to do that if we're going to compete in the innovation economy. 10 years ago, the idea in Orlando was to build a medical city. And to say you could fly into Orlando, visit Medical City, get your treatment while your kids go to Disney. And you wouldn't even have to go through a stoplight. 10 years later, Nemours Children's Hospital is built there. The new VA hospital, which is their headquarters for modeling and simulation and medicine, is built there. We have Burnham Labs, which is a biomedical laboratory that had relocated there. We have the Guidewell Innovation Center, which is going to be a biotech research incubator. All of those are in Medical City now. 10 years ago, that was an idea.
Is that a part of downtown?
No, it's just southeast of the airport.
Okay.
And so in Osceola County, the new idea this year that's been years in the making has been Chip City, which is building the new smart chips. And so they build a facility. They have about 500 acres, and that's the idea today. I'm excited for 10 years from now to see what Chip City has become. And so the U.S. Tennis Association just built 100 courts here and relocated their headquarters. Verizon just located their headquarters for back-end accounting here. KPMG just opened their training facility here for their national training center. So we're getting Fortune 500 companies to say, I'm tired of shoveling snow and scraping my windshield, and we have some great tax treatment for corporations, but we also have visionary leadership that says we're about helping you, and helping you will help us tremendously.
Sounds like you guys are really trying to have a diverse portfolio from small businesses of many different sizes and styles and backgrounds, but also having a place where big businesses can also help and supplement some of the economic growth of the area and potentially help some of the small businesses as well. One thing that you said that was really key in there is on some of these projects, who are the small businesses that can be a part of this bid sequence, be part of that? What are you guys doing to ensure that a big guy doesn't just come in and use his big guy people to help him, making sure that those small businesses are able to not only just raise their hand but also get some work out of it?
Sure. The first part is getting them ready. We just had an event last fall to say, if we're going to be there with smart chips in 10 years, what do you need to be doing today to be ready to get a piece of that business? And so sometimes businesses are so busy doing the daily work, they forget to put their head up and say, look, there's an opportunity. And so first thing is making them aware, getting them prepared. Secondly is the talent pool. Right now, when you just take the University of Central Florida, which is now the second largest university in the country, it's bigger than Ohio State. We have two community colleges that have over about 100,000. No, that's not right. Just under 100,000 students between the two of them. And so you've got about 160,000 students in the five county area of Orlando. So you've got talent pool. And so when someone comes and says, I'm bringing the back end accounting for Verizon, boy, students are enrolling in accounting right now and bookkeeping. And so knowing that you have a ready and available talent source does that. Construction, part of what we do is we put in every bid that there's a requirement to use women and minority and small owned companies and small companies. And so we hold them to task and say, so we're at the end, let's look at the report card. And sometimes what we do is set out a goal to say maybe 17% women-owned companies. And then we get done, like the new arena down here, and they had a 31% minority and women-owned business participation in building the new arena. And so that's giving the hand up to some of those construction firms to say, maybe they just do drywall in a wing. Maybe they just paint a wall. But it gives them some experience with the large contractors. And so that's how we try to mentor them into that.
100 million visitors in Florida alone a year, 66 million go through Orlando. What are you guys doing to market those 66 million to know that Orlando or that Disney is not just the half of it? I'm saying that wrong. That Orlando, you don't know the half of it. What are you doing to make sure that those people, the 66 million that come through, know that Orlando is a place where business is happening and it's not just Disney?
Well, that's the branding, is you don't know the half of it. And so when people come to town, let's say they have pictures of the skyscrapers downtown, which really aren't skyscrapers. I mean, compared to you guys, they're tall buildings in Orlando. And so they take pictures of those and say, not all the castles are at Disney. And so they talk about creative characters, and they focus on the business characters here, not just the creative characters that you would know from Disney. And so Disney is a huge sponsor of our center. And so they are invested in helping the businesses around grow. And so they are the ones that led that branding campaign to say, we need to let people know that Orlando's more than just Disney.
That's incredible. I love that. Not all the castles are at Disney. That's clever. That's why they're so good at that.
Not all the characters are at Disney, and they have, the people running these wonderful organizations around, and they're characters. They're great fun to work with.
And we've talked for a couple of minutes now, and we haven't really talked about Disney, and that's what it's known for. So it's cool to know what you guys are doing there, and how you guys in the last 15 years after a crisis have really looked at that and said, look, we need to be resilient, or something bad is going to happen again. I appreciate your time, Jerry Ross. You guys can learn about them and more about Jerry and the National Entrepreneur Center at nationalec.org, and maybe like them on Facebook, and maybe they're 86,001 follower. Jerry, appreciate your time and continued success down there in Orlando.
Thank you for having me, and come on down to visit.
We definitely will.
All righty. I'd love to give you a tour.
Yep.